Hi, I'm Femi OK. Thanks for watching the stream. Made in Africa. Could that be the solution to vaccine inequity across the African continent? We have all seen firsthand what happens when there is a global pandemic and vaccines aren't available to everybody who needs them. But what if Africa and African countries start to produce their own vaccines? Could that be a game changer? We start our conversation with Krishna.
Over the past 3 years, our team has studied the global access and inequities to COVID-19 vaccines, and we see clearly that lack of manufacturing capacity, especially in Africa, has been a key driver of global inequities. That means there has to be significant investment from both the public and the private sector. There has to be access to intellectual property and know-how. We need the human capital, so significant training and capacity building is necessary. We've got to rework the supply chains to ensure that they are adequate for regional manufacturing. And we have to make sure that regulatory support and regulatory oversight are appropriate to ensure that we're developing quality assured vaccines around the world.
Ooh, that's quite a list. But what I love is that there is a list. There are possibilities, there's a strategy, at least one strategy. I am going to welcome Petro and also Dr. Yodi. I know you know Dr. Yodi, and they're both going to introduce themselves to you in the context of making vaccines in Africa. Petro, welcome to the stream. Please say hello to our viewers around the world. Tell them who you are, what you do.
Femi, thank you very much. I'm Pietro Blanche. I'm the Managing Director of African Biotechnology, Biologics. We're based in Cape Town, and we are the WHO mRNA hub, making mRNA technology accessible to Africa to produce their own mRNA vaccines.
All right.
Great to be on the show.
Great to have you. Dr. Yodi, it is so lovely to have you. We've been talking to you a lot over the past couple of years, but this is something quite fresh and new and potentially positive. Remind our audience who you are, what you do.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you, Femi, and it's great to be on the show with sisters. My name is Dr. Ayode Alakija, known as Dr. Yodi. I wear several hats, but for this show, really the most pertinent one is that I chair the Africa Union Africa Vaccine Delivery Alliance, as well as I'm Special Envoy for the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, which is a global platform situated at WHO.
All right, good to have you, ladies. Good to have you, audience, as well. If you're watching right now, you're on YouTube, you're an important part of our conversation. Put your comments, your questions right here. Be part of today's show. Facts and figures, Petra and Dr. Yodi. We have to show these for our audience. So see where we are right now. So 1% of vaccines used in Africa are made in Africa. Shocking. 90% of vaccines used in Africa are imported. 0.1% of the global supply of vaccines produced in Africa, 25% of the global supply of vaccines is used in Africa. So a big user of vaccines, a very small producer of vaccines. Why is there that imbalance? Petro, you start.
Femi, many reasons. Firstly, this is a reality which is not new. This has been in history for 10 years. But the one thing that the COVID pandemic have done is to really surface this reality and create a stream of energy that will change it. So the reasons being lack of capacity, the reasons being as that the global suppliers dominates the landscape, the reason being that there was never a strategy that was comprehensive, creation of an ecosystem and implemented. Now we have the strategy, and the strategy we have started to implement. So this time we're going to get it right.
Yodi, what always strikes me is the brilliance of scientists and researchers and doctors on the African continent. And some of the amazing research that was done during the beginning of our global pandemic that we're in right now came from within the continent. So it's not the brain power, it's not the intelligence, is it just money? Is that it?
It's
or is it
power.
Or is it electricity?
It's money and it's power.
Yeah.
I would say that we absolutely have the capacity, and we often hear, you've just heard from Petra, who's doing some incredible work. We often hear that there is no, we'd have to import the capacity. The capacity exists within Africa. The the know-how, the sort of the ability is inherently there. Many of our diasporans are the ones who work in many of this manufacturing areas around the world. But it is power, and it is also responsibility, it's leadership, and it is governance.
Right.
But there is an opportunity within this crisis. This is a moment for hope. As Petro said, that what the pandemic has done, it has shone a magnifying glass on all of the inequities in the world that we live in. And that is now showing us all as Africa that we need to be in charge, not just of our own vaccines, but of our own health security more broadly, not just vaccine production, but all the medical countermeasures. We also don't have testing. We don't have the diagnostics capacity, not just for COVID, but for a myriad of ailments and illnesses. We also don't have the therapeutics capacity. We're not able to, right now on the African continent, there is no Paxlovid, which is the tablet du jour to treat COVID. And why is that? Because people like Petro at Afrigen and our friends at Aspen and also our friends in Senegal should be able to make these drugs, but the technical transfer and the sharing of that proper international of the technology, let me not get too technical, is not there. So people like Petro are looking at the world saying, come on, come to us, aren't you, Petro? Come on, we're ready. We have the know-how, we have the capacity. We just need you not to give us permission, but we need you to lean into this moment and recognize that Africa's health security is also global health security and vice versa.
So Yodi, you're right. There needs to be a can-do attitude. We have the R&D capabilities in pockets on the continent, but without building a policy environment and without building a vertically integrated sector, we cannot harness and leverage the value of R&D knowledge. I think what we've demonstrated, the continent in various capacities over the last 18 months, is that we have the scientific base, we have the technical base, we need infrastructure, we need investment, and we need a policy environment that will stimulate local production and local procurement. Without that, we will not have a sustainable sector. So this is an ecosystem that needs to be created of regulatory and quality, and a marketplace reform that will procure locally. And not only global procurement.
Petro, this is huge. You are building an entire industry almost from scratch. And I say this as
but not on my own.
Yes. No, but even if it's not by yourself, maybe, even if it's with several countries getting together, or the WHO giving the support, this is huge. And let me start with something that I do understand, and that is, what are the vaccine needs? Of course, we're in a global pandemic, so there's COVID. But beyond that, Dr. Yodi, what else?
There's measles, there's rubella, there's but I mean, something that is very close and dear to my heart, and I'm currently visiting sort of the global health sort of gurus and headquarters of the world in Geneva. I've just recently been talking to some people about HPV vaccines and also the testing, the diagnostics for the human papillomavirus, which is, basically the cause of cervical cancer. We have vaccines that, for instance, can prevent this. We have testing that can prevent this. We in Africa need to be able to look beyond COVID. We need to be able to look at the fact that not every African country is going to be able to produce COVID vaccines. I mean, there are people talking about producing them all over the shop. And we must be realistic that there isn't the absorptive capacity for everybody to produce just COVID. So let's look to the future. Let's look to protecting our girls and our women on the continent. Let's look to things like the HPV, the vaccine for girls and women. Let's look to things like, Aspen in South Africa are now looking at producing the sort of suite of childhood immunization vaccines. We must be able to have regional production capacity on the African continent because we need to protect our own health security. What happened during COVID was that other countries, stopped their vaccine exports because they were protecting their own sovereignty. And that is, that is understandable. But the world can now not say to Africa, you must not produce your own. But what Petro is saying is absolutely correct. We need the policy environment. But when we look at that policy environment, we must first of all say we need to look at the leadership in our own continent. And we need to hold our own leaders and our own selves accountable.
Yodi, hold that thought for a moment. We're talking about leadership. I'm going to go to the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, and this is what he said last year. And I'm just looking here. It was almost a year ago to the date. And this is about the potential for what can be produced in the African continent. Here he is.
Today, I'm delighted to announce the first 6 African countries that will receive technology from the hub to produce their own mRNA vaccines: Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. More than 80% of the population of Africa is yet to receive a single dose. Much of this inequity has been driven by the fact that globally vaccine production is concentrated in a few mostly high-income countries.
Petra, that announcement made me smile. One was because it was hopeful, and the other one is like Dr. Tedros was almost like a game show host. And our contestants are going to be Egypt and Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa and Tunisia. But it is a little bit like that, isn't it? How transformative could this be, the tech that is coming your way?
Femi, hugely. Maybe just to circle back on your previous question, we have identified 22 priority vaccines on this continent.
Okay.
Those are the vaccines which are not only for routine vaccination, but also for outbreaks. Ebola, Lassa, vaccines for HIV, neglected diseases. So there is a clear strategy and a demand and a need being identified. Circling back to Dr. Tedros' announcement, it was amazing that 5 companies in 5 countries on the continent will have access to future relevant mRNA technology through this program. We have already had Tunisia and Egypt at Afrigen receiving the first knowledge transfer for mRNA technology. We will receive Senegal in the next month, and we are waiting for Nigeria and Kenya. BioVac already being trained, and BioVac already ready to receive the first technology package. So this program is building future relevant capacity for mRNA vaccine production. It diversifies the platforms in Egypt, and it adds platforms to new companies in Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, and of course BioVac being expanded and being one of the foremost entities. This is fundamentally a game changer. mRNA technology it has a promise for innovation. It has a promise not only for COVID-19, in fact, beyond that.
Petra, can you explain?
It has a promise for cancer.
Yes. Yeah,
it has a promise for malaria.
Yes.
It has a promise,
yes.
but we've had so many promises on the continent. And I'm going to go back to my point and also Petra's point about policy and all of that. The Abuja Declaration that our leaders made in Africa was 21 years ago now. It was 20 years ago in 2022. I'm still forgetting.
I wasn't born, Yodi.
And no, of course, neither was I, Femi.
Yeah,
Come on.
we read about it.
Who was born in 20 years ago? We don't know about this, but we read about it. This is history. And 20 years ago, I actually have to confess that I was in Abuja that day. It was May in 2020 that the Abuja Declaration was decided by our leaders that they would commit 15% to health budgets. Where are we today? I think only one country in Africa has reached that 15%, and I don't want to insult anybody, so I won't mention which ones in case I'm wrong. And but this is investment. So what Petra is talking about, we can't always have, the world is perceiving us as not investing ourselves in our own health security. And for me, that is where this starts, because the buck stops at home. I have been known to say during the early days of COVID that if COVID had originated in Africa, the world would have locked us away and thrown away the key. There would have been no Operation Warp Speed. There would have been no investment in R&D, because we have to develop our own, and we have to commit ourselves and our leadership, and we have to push for
but
not just the world
necessarily,
to prioritize us,
that's not
but for Africa.
I hear you, but that message is not necessarily getting to the leaders on the African continent. So we can cry as Africans about inequity, you've left us behind. This is, I have to be very careful here, but this is vaccine apartheid. And it's what's good for you is not good for Africans. So all of those things there. But the leadership is so critical, and there is some responsibility there, surely.
Absolutely, and this is what I'm saying, that we have to look inwards first.
Yeah.
We have we have to, I mean, when you point one finger outwards, the next four point towards yourself. And we have to look inwards. You know what Dr. Tedros announced there. And, I had the privilege, I've just had the privilege of meeting with him for a few hours this afternoon, talking about the future, talking about how we ensure that we do ensure the health security, not just of Africa, but of Latin America, of Asia and many other parts of the world. It starts with leadership. And so we have to look at that policy environment that Petra was talking about, and I'll hand it over to her.
Go ahead, Petra.
So I want to move this to a bigger picture. Even if we start to forget what the impact of COVID-19 was, as we forgot with HIV in 2000, as we forgot with about influenza, as we forgot about Ebola, if we then also forget about COVID-19 and the impact, let's move this conversation to socio-economic development. For the leadership on this continent, what is the most important opportunity and responsibility is to develop this continent. Vaccine manufacturing capacity, capturing the value of this massive market in Africa for vaccine supply, even if we put the health issues aside, is a socio-economic development imperative. No leader cannot invest in that. Building a workforce, direct foreign investment, intellectual property and innovation, infrastructure,
export,
health security.
Export.
So, ladies,
Petra, we are currently receiving vaccines from other middle-income countries. Most of the vaccines that have been received in Africa to date have been made not in high-income countries, but in Asian countries. So that's why I said at the very top of this is there's an opportunity in this crisis. But what we need to do is also broaden it. I think because we're in COVID, when people talk about vaccines, people think of COVID vaccines, and we need to begin to use the language that Petra used earlier about the 22 priority vaccines. You do know that there was the current strain of Ebola, which, thank goodness, yesterday, and I want to congratulate the Ugandan government and my sister Jane, the minister. That
I'm going to bring Jane in right now.
Ebola outbreak over.
Yeah.
But those vaccines, they were in a freezer somewhere, the ones that are being used in a trial, that a company considered it was not worth their while to develop that
Yodi,
further.
let me just bring in. Let me bring in the Minister of Health for Uganda. You just named her. So relevant as we look ahead to what is possible with vaccines, how they're important that they're produced within African countries. And this is what she had to say October the 12th, 2022. Very relevant to our conversation right now. Here she is.
Working together, we shall come up with practical solutions to better protect our communities and reduce any chances of cross-border spread of this virus in the spirit of African solutions for African problems. In the long term, as African governments, we need to bolster investment in research and development, innovation, and manufacturing of health tools such as vaccines, diagnostics, and essential therapeutics to address the wide spectrum of diseases that threaten us.
All right, so
absolutely.
I have YouTube comments and questions for both of you. Petra, help me out with these. This is the speed round for you. So we have from Hussainda here, this is the best solution for the African continent, for the whole issue with vaccine inequity, the best solution. Petra, response.
I agree.
That one was easy. All right. Bruce on YouTube is very concerned. Vaccine oversight in African countries, would it be rigorous enough? Dr. Yodi.
Okay, so I'm going to go to that question. This is what we get hit with all the time. People say, what is going to be the quality? That is the sort of, it is almost insulting.
Do you know what you're really doing? That's what that means.
The continent that first discovered Omicron, for instance. It was Africa that identified the sequence, the Omicron variant, and the world then tried to shut us out. But then, so when we do genomic sequencing that benefits the world, it's okay. But when we're trying to produce medicines, people will say the quality is not good enough. That is not an attitude that we should bring to the table. And that's what Jane just said, of Minister of Health of Uganda, about not just technology transfer or intellectual property. I think we need to move beyond that. And we need to look at the innovation within our continent itself. We need to ourselves begin to discover the talents and the research and development capabilities that enable us to create our own therapeutics and our own diagnostics. And we need to work with the rest of the world so that Africa, as she said, African solutions for African problems. No quality, I don't think, is an issue. We have the know-how on the continent, Bruce.
Oh, Pedro, I love this question. It comes from Garbage Girl, who's watching on YouTube right now. Thank you. Could this have happened, are you looking at vaccine production from the African continent, had we not experienced a pandemic?
I think it would have taken a long time, because we had previously epidemics that was devastating for the continent, but not for the global world. And we could not leverage the energy, the support that we've done with COVID-19. I believe that this has been the pandemic has been a landmark change for this continent, and we will keep the momentum and we will implement the strategies that was born out of COVID-19 anxiety and fear and inequality.
So Michael, you're such a troublemaker on YouTube. Share the patents, because people's lives are on the line. It's easy for you to type that in the comments section. Dr. Yodi, you have 30 seconds to respond to that. Share the patents.
The whole conversation around sharing patents has been going on for several years, and we've all been bashing at each other. Again, I've just said, I've also just had the privilege of meeting with the Director General of WTO, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, to discuss this very issue in the last 24 hours, and to discuss how is it that we can move forward together as a global community, not at each other, but together with arm in arm around sharing the intellectual property.
What did Ngozi say? Because she's very much business orientated. She's like, we're not going to give away this. We had her on the stream, and she was really interesting on how she was defending the ability for companies to make money. They need to make money. They're not just going to give away.
I wouldn't say that I think there's been a lot of discussion around it, and I wouldn't say that she's defending the company's ability to make money. But the fact is that we have governments in this world. We have the US government. We have various other governments who are very protective of those industries. And that is why I said, if you remember from the earlier question, that it is not just about sharing the tech, but it is about the innovation within our own continent. Because Rome was not built in a day. So we can't always sit back and wait for somebody to share tech. We have to begin now the research and development into creating the diagnostics. And I know, there's various companies both in Senegal and in Kenya that are about to begin to develop diagnostics capacity that is homegrown and local. So we need to look at that, whilst we also work hand in hand with the pharmaceutical industry, of whom Petro is one. She belongs to pharma, African pharma, and we have to look at how we move together.
All right, let me give Petro the last word here, because she's doing the R&D. Petro, if you take us 25 years into the future, what is the best case scenario for vaccines being made in Africa? Will Africa be exporting vaccines? Is that possible?
Yes, Africa will have multiple companies with multiple platforms, and Africa will contribute to vaccine innovation globally. We have the ability, once we've built the sector, to innovate. We will generate our own intellectual property, and I hope that we will be open to share it in benefit sharing agreements. It is not to be monopolized. It is to be shared in license agreements that has benefit for everybody, and not to be held close to give a monopoly. I think these are different worlds. We need the balance to be restored and not make way with IP or give it away. I think we need to use intellectual property as an enabler. Why not?
Petro, Dr. Yodi, viewers on YouTube, thank you so much. This is a very vibrant, vigorous conversation. I'm going to be following with great interest how vaccine production is happening in Africa, when it is happening in Africa, and you can be sure that we will report on that right here on the stream. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.